Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast, a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today.
Welcome to GSMC, America's Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alyssa Jo. Hello, everybody. How is it going today? I hope you're having a wonderful day so far. Happy Thursday. I hope you're having a good week. I am back with more feel-good, positive stories to share with you today. I've got lots of good ones. I got some new studies about the environment and animals. I've got new discoveries. I've got positive things about the pandemic. All those fun Alyssa Jo stories that I love to share. There's lots of them on here on today's episode. So I will stop rambling on and I will jump right in to sharing that positive, feel-good news stories with you. So the first one I want to share with you is a new study that says the conservation programs have prevented at least 48 animal extinctions, which is pretty amazing. So since 1993, 48 mammal and bird species have been saved by extinction by conservation actions. So according to the researchers' models, this was a coordinated effort by governments, academic institutions, nonprofits, and others that prevented the rate of the extinctions from reaching levels of 300 to 400% higher. So the researchers from Newcastle University, they used 4 different criteria to measure the conservation actions, and they compared the number of species listed as extinct in the wild or critically endangered that historically have benefited from these criteria to the flat number of known extinctions across 2 periods. So 1993 to 2020 and 2010 to 2020. So what they found was that between 1993 and 2020, extinction rates would have been 3.1 to 4.2 times higher for birds, so representing about 21 to 32 different birds, and 2.4 to 4.2 times higher for mammals, representing about 7 to 16 mammal species. So Dr. Reich Bolem from Newcastle University, he's the co-lead author of this study, and he says it is encouraging that some of the species have recovered very well. Our analysis provide a strikingly positive message that conservation has substantially reduced extinction rates for birds and mammals. So of all the rescued species, the largest numbers of birds that were saved was in New Zealand. So 6 of them in New Zealand, 5 in Brazil, and the largest number of mammals was in China, which was 5, and Vietnam and US, which was 3. So the study also found that different families benefited differently from different conservation strategies. Birds benefited more from invasive species control and habitat protection, while mammals were saved more by the government legislation and zoo reintroduction programs. But the 2 periods correspond to the signings of major international understandings on the importance of biodiversity. So the first is in the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, so the CBD, and then the second is the Aichi Conservation Targets, which was adopted by parties to the CBD back in 2010. So the CBD Treaty, which was signed during the first convention hosted in Rio in 1993, basically laid out a structure for modern, internationally collaborative conservative efforts that involved all the countries of the world, not only those in Europe and America. And the parties that were conscious of the intrinsic value of biologic diversity and of the ecological, genetic, social, economic, scientific, educational, cultural, recreational, and aesthetic values of biological diversity and its components. So basically, the starts of this treaty, it resolves to pursue that the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of its components, and the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of utilization of genetic resources. So the CBD's 2010 Aichi conservation targets were set for review in 2020, and it includes such an very ambitious goals as preventing the extinction of known threatened species while simultaneously improving their conservation status. So they say that the loss of entire species can be stopped if there is sufficient will to do so. This is a call to action, showing the scale of the issues and what we can achieve if we act now to support conservation and prevent extinction. So that was the study's co-author, Phil McGowan. So we got to keep these conservation efforts going because they are working. Okay, now I have a pretty cool story. I don't know, I'm sure you've probably played this at one point in your life. At least you've seen like the original Nintendo Game Boy, right? You know what it looks like the little tiny like Nintendo Game Boy. Well, scientists at Northwestern University and Holland's Deaf University of Technology have now given the classic 8-bit Nintendo Game Boy a full makeover. And to be specific, they gave it a green makeover. It's pretty cool. And I'm not just saying the color, literally a green makeover, because it's powering the console with the energy of button pressing and then a solar panel that's in the display screen. Isn't that cool? So it looks and feels exactly like the original pretty much, but the scientists preserved the old processor, allowing anyone who kept their antique cartridges around immediately to access them again, which is pretty cool. And so it was released in 1989, right? The original Game Boy. And it was originally powered by two AA batteries. Eventually it moved into its later incarnations to a rechargeable device battery, like the ones in our cell phones, right? But even still, any battery is environmentally costly to manufacture and difficult to recycle, right? So gaming-specific computers and laptops are often the most powerful, robust, and high-tech computers available, but also put the biggest number on an electric bill. So a powerful proof-of-concept project designed to help toward the ultimate goal of battery-free computing is the Green Game Boy that they have invented. So it demonstrates the effectiveness of several kinds of battery alternatives and perhaps opens the doors to harvesting energy from our interactions with the system. So like the keyboard strokes made on our laptops, for example, right? So it is the first battery-free interactive device that harvests energy from the user's interactions. And it says when you press a button, the device converts that energy into something that powers your gaming. So for gamers who are familiar, with these kind of themes, then you might understand that the 1 second of interruption for every 10 seconds of gameplay, as the Green Game Boy is currently vulnerable to as a result of the infancy of Hester Team's technology. So it's fine for things like chess and Tetris, but intolerable for something like Super Mario Bros, just because of the whole timing. So to address this issue, the scientists developed a new technique of storing the system state in non-volatile memory, so minimizing overhead and allowing quick restoration when power returns. So in effect, this means that there's no save button, but that the console actually returns to you exactly where you were when the device lost power. So it basically just opens right back up. So there's still a long way to go before, the state-of-the-art 21st century handheld game consoles will become completely battery-free, but it's definitely a start. And the example of how looking to the future often means, starting in the past a little bit. So they took the original Game Boy and they made it green for our future. So if you want to go check this out, there was a video that kind of demonstrates it quite well. It's just literally search a battery-free Game Boy runs forever. And there's a whole video on it. It's a pretty cool little device that they've come up with. All right, well, it is time for a little bit of a break, but don't go anywhere, because when we get back, I have lots more feel-good stories to share with you. I got a story about how New Zealand is becoming a world leader in hydrogen energy. I have another story about electric car batteries. Pretty interesting. They are making a revolutionary change. I also have a survey about Americans who are saying that they believe that they've become a better person this year. Even though we've had a crazy, hectic year, they are saying they've become a better person. So you don't want to miss all that information. I got lots more to share with you, so stay tuned. I will be right back.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to GSMC, America's Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alyssa Jo. Hello. Okay, let's jump right back into these feel-good, positive stories. I got lots more to share with you. So, New Zealand is on its way to become a world leader in hydrogen energy, and this is all because of the zero-emission trucks that are going to be coming in New Zealand. So the roads of New Zealand will soon be worked over by these long-distance trucks that are powered entirely by ultra-sustainable hydrogen-powered electric fuel cells. So pretty cool, right? So capable of traveling about 310 miles, which is 500 kilometers on one tank. These special fuel cells use hydrogen stored on board and oxygen from the atmosphere to generate electricity and power the car. So since H plus O equals H2O, the only emission of any kind coming out of the tailpipe is literally water. How cool is that? So this news comes to, it's news to this Kiwi company, Haringa and Hyzon Motors. So it's a U.S. manufacturer of hydrogen fuel cells, and they just signed the head of agreement that would allow Haringa's hydrogen-powered electric vehicles to start hauling freight as early as 2022. So that's positioning New Zealand as a world leader in hydrogen vehicle infrastructure. So between late 2020 and 2026, Haringa expects to roll out about 1,500 different of these vehicles, varying in size, from van shape to 18-wheelers to road train models for the Australian market as well. So the company also expects to outfit the North and South Islands of the Pacific nation with the world's most sophisticated hydrogen refueling network that's slated to come online in 2021. And these vehicles have been around for years, but are often overlooked as a font of carbon reduction assets in the transportation sector in favor of battery-powered electric vehicles. However, though, the unlikely latter that they don't require massive increases in battery technology to become viable. So instead, they suffer, like battery EVs, from a lack of refueling stations. So working with regional, national, and native governments, the Haringa is poised to service about 82% of trucking routes on the South Island and 100% on the North Island with a literally zero emissions supply chain. So currently around 60% of New Zealand's power needs are met with fossil fuels, but the island is a wonderful of, geological, hydrological, and meteorological forces. So the company Haringa, who take their name from a word meaning perseverance, adaptability, and vitality, feel that number is far too high. So they're saying that New Zealand is set to be one of the first countries in the world to be able to offer a zero emission national supply chain, and to be developing this fully integrated solution in New Zealand is an excellent example of the joint leadership being shown by the transport and hydrogen industries in the country. So that was the Haringa CEO, Andrew Clinett. He says that the Haringa hydrogen infrastructure deployment will position New Zealand to become a global leader in the adoption of zero emissions heavy vehicle technology, and we are pleased to be playing a part in this transition. So New York's Hyzon Motors have also forged their own path through this market, and along with working with Haringa, this year they've also signed the agreement to provide Australian ore miners the Fortescue Metals Group and the world's fourth largest exporter of iron, with a fleet of HPEVs for operations in Western Australia that's going to be saving about 400 to 450 million liters of diesel a year. Pretty crazy. Now, keeping kind of on this good for environment car train, this entrepreneur realized the common complaints with electric vehicles originate from the battery and not actually the car itself. So this entrepreneur decided to create an entirely new battery system for the electric vehicles, and this earned himself the backing of Volkswagen in the process, which is just absolutely huge. So, he says long charging times, limited range, higher cost, weight, and limited cabin space. Basically, these are all the negative selling points that have to do with the battery-powered nature of electric vehicles. So, partially because the technology in them has so far been limited to banks of lithium-ion batteries, of ever-increasing in size, right? So, Jagdeep Singh started this company called QuantumScape, that's using solid-state technology for their batteries. So basically, thanks to the immediate valuation from investors, Bill Gates is one of them, QuantumScape is now worth $3.3 billion, and major backers like Volkswagen have already committed to using this technology in their next generation of EVs in 2024. And along with presenting the problems of cost, size, and charging time, the lithium-ion batteries require materials known as rare earth minerals, which tend to be costly and environmentally destructive to mine. So replacing the liquid graphite silicone anode electrolyte at the center of the lithium-ion battery with a solid ceramic material, will then QuantumScape's battery providing significantly increased energy density and lower cost. So along with removing a significant fire hazard in the form of the liquid anode. So pretty interesting stuff. Most importantly, though, a solid-state battery can go from 0% charge to 80% charge in just 15 minutes, which is lightning speed compared to the competitors. So this will not only make EVs viable for things like road trip vacations, but also transportation for an entirely new class of consumer, which is actually apartment owners. So EV drivers with garages have been able to charge up overnight, making the question of range just a non-issue, right? However, though, waiting at public charging stations for 12 hours is out of the question for those who want to help speed the transition away from fossil fuels, but who doesn't have a garage or reliable exterior electricity access with which to charge their car. So what you need to do is basically make electric cars competitive with combustion engines on all metrics. And they say that those metrics not only include cost, but range, charge time, safety, the life of the car. And that's exactly what they're going to be doing with the solid-state batteries. So they say, we believe this also allows car companies to make electric cars that are much more closer to combustion engine rivals than traditional batteries do. So we think that kind of breakthrough is exactly what's required for people to start replacing their combustion cars with EVs the next time they're out in the market to buy a new car. All right, so those are the positive stories I have with vehicles and the environment, but I will tell you about this survey. So they're saying that 2/3 of Americans believe that they have become a better person this year. And there was about 2,000 Americans that were polled over the age of 21, and it looked at the positive changes to come from this challenging time and the ways in which the respondents are reprioritizing what they value. So the results revealed 55% of respondents were a bit embarrassed by some of the things they valued pre-quarantine, and the many months spent at home gave 70% a chance to learn more about themselves. So basically they're saying that this year understandably changed Americans' outlook on life. Some respondents gained the time and flexibility to delve into their new hobbies and discover new passions. Shortages of baking products in the grocery store was definitely proof of all of this. 35% said they want to continue those hobbies once the quarantine is over. And they said this opportunity to explore personal interests beyond work has led about 27% of respondents to indicate they're hoping to achieve a better work-life balance coming out of quarantine. And being close to the people we care about was a major theme for all of the respondents. About 46% want to spend more time with friends and family, and 38% plan to create more meaningful relationships with those around them. So here are the top things people no longer take for granted. Spending quality time in person with family or friends, 52%. Hugs, 41%. Traveling to new destinations, 32%. A relaxing walk in the park, 31%. Shopping in a store, 31%. A date night at a restaurant, 31%. Extended family gatherings, 30%. Attending events in person, 28%, stopping for a cup of coffee on my way to work, 25%, meeting new people, 25%, weekly coffee dates with friends, 24%, post-work happy hour, 23%, chatting with coworkers during lunch, 23%, having a quiet weekend at home, be out of the ordinary, 22%, an afternoon at the beach, 22%, sending my children off to school in the morning, 21%, attending sporting events, 21%, wandering through a bookstore, 20%, watching my kids' sporting events, 18%, hitting the gym, 17%, and dropping my kids off at play dates, 16%. There you have it. That's how appreciative Americans now have become over this year. All right, it's time for another break, but don't go anywhere. I have some positive COVID-19 trends that I cannot wait to share with you, and also a pretty cool story about what McDonald's UK has done for the environment. Don't go anywhere. I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to GSMC, America's Still Beautiful podcast. We're on the last stretch of today's episode. My name is Alyssa Jo. I am your host. I will jump right back into it. So, like always, I promise some kind of positive information about the pandemic. And there has been some positive trends that have been out now that are pretty interesting. So I thought I would share them with you. A lot of the media coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic, as we all know, has been, a lot of bad news, a lot of fear in the viewers. And a lot of these media people, or just media in general, focuses on single stories, about young people dying, or milestone numbers of cases nationwide, like things like that, right? But National Geographic is actually one company that's doing a better job of reflecting both the positive and the negative. So otherwise, it's quite difficult to find reporting about, where coronavirus is suffering is becoming uncommon. So, such as in the most every New England state, for example. So, Arizona is continuing its vast improvement, bringing down death rates and number of cases. And the same is true for some states in the South and Midwest. So, there are some charts and there are some trends that have been going on. So, even in Florida, which most people assume to be doing poorly, is actually seeing hospitalization totals and new cases drop pretty continuously. This is all based on reports from the Florida Department of Health and the Orlando Centennial. So basically, there were some trends to identify, some of the positive news, especially in the U.S., but also from England and Italy. And it turns out there's actually a lot of good news that we don't see on the mainstream media. So this was an article that I found, and I was super excited to be able to share this with you guys today. So, the United States Centers for Disease Control, this is reported on September 4th, that new COVID-19 cases overall have been declining since mid-July. Nationally, the average number of new cases has been declining for over a month and a half. Indicators that track influenza-like illness and COVID-19-like illness continue to decrease or remain stable nationally and in all 10 regions. And remember, there are still some states where the numbers may be going up, but the above quote basically refers to regions and numbers nationally across the United States. Hospitalization rates and mortality attributed to COVID-19 also declined during week 35. So that ended about August 29th, and hospitalizations have continuously declined since peaking at 58,000 in July. So in a broader sense, that they're saying that taking into account other illnesses in the U.S. based on death certificate data, the percentage of deaths attributed to pneumonia, influenza, or COVID-19 for week 35 dropped more than 4% from the previous week. So from 10.7% down to 6.6%. In the UK, the number of people in hospital with COVID-19 has plummeted by 96%, which is amazing, since the peak of the pandemic. And the overall death rate in England and Wales was lower in 2020 than it was in 2019 for July. New York has reported its lowest COVID-19 infection rate since the start of the pandemic, and almost the entire northeast region of the U.S. has tackled the coronavirus problem very well throughout the summer. And realistically, statistics for COVID cases and deaths in the U.S. can be quite tricky to track down, but given all the trouble getting these right, trend lines are a pretty fantastic window into progress. So there has been these data that have now been released, and it's basically some of the states with the biggest decreases in the past 7 days. There's images from South Dakota, Kentucky, Mississippi, Hawaii, Idaho, Alabama, Georgia, Arkansas, West Virginia, Arizona. What I will do is I will take a picture of these graphs for you and post them up on our social media pages so you can take a look at exactly what I'm talking about. And they say that the likelihood of someone dying after being admitted to intensive care with COVID-19 has pretty much halved since the early days of the pandemic, which is amazing. And thanks to the better understanding of how to treat the disease in the emergency room, that has obviously helped out a lot. Italy, which was once just chaotic and terrible, right, with this pandemic stuff, is pretty much returned back to beautiful. It was quite devastated by the virus in the early spring, as we all know, but most things have actually returned to normal in the northern part of the country, which was the region that was most heavily hit. So people do wear masks and use hand sanitizer as a habit whenever entering grocery stores or restaurants. But in the case of restaurants or bars, they will get to their table and the mask can come off. Minority of the population, so about 10 to 15%, it looked like seemed to be wearing masks outdoors and on sidewalks, but only recording about 10 deaths per day in a country of 60 million people. So the Italians, saw many cities and towns have a casual but cautious attitude that embraces life as it comes along. And they say that they enjoy everything in the moment, believing in a live and let live approach that Americans could benefit from. So you hear that? I guess everyone's got to live with the live and let live approach. But there is the positive news I have about the pandemic. Always got to throw in something positive about the pandemic. Now, I mentioned how McDonald's UK is doing something pretty incredible for the environment. And they have now created returnable, reusable coffee cups. So they're testing a new system of these reusable, returnable cups to cut back on the demand for hot beverage to-go containers. So there's now that 600 billion of them are produced each year around, which is just crazy. So instead of relying merely on biodegradable or recyclable cups, the McDonald's Vice President of Global Sustainability, Jenny McCall, is basically opting for a reusable system of drink cups made by a company called Loop. And so this initiative aims to give consumers a greater sense of responsibility towards the cup and the waste in general. So in their system, a small deposit will be paid on each cup, which will be returned to the buyer upon its deposit into a special in-store bin or at collection points in other participating stores across the country. And then it can be rounded up and brought to a facility to be sterilized and sent back to the restaurants to be used again. So you can now leave the restaurant with it and deposit it anywhere, basically. Tom Sasky, the CEO of Loop, says, so you get that sort of to-go experience fulfilled, and you don't have to deal with anything other than depositing it back into the Loop ecosystem. So German McDonald's, as well as American companies like Starbucks and Peet's Coffee, they offer small discounts for customers who bring in their own cup. But in part because of the inconvenience of bringing, a tumbler kind of everywhere with you, relatively, not a lot of coffee drinkers take the advantage of that deal. But with this system, there's you can deposit it in many different locations. So Loop and McDonald's are taking the inspiration from Germany's Recup, which is one of the finalists of the Next Gen Cup Challenge. So that was a contest that was sponsored by McDonald's and closed loop partners. It was just launched last year to try and find the best solutions for to-go cup sustainability problems. And so the Recup works much as kind of Loop, like the same company, and it's sort of like a bike sharing, but for cups is how they describe it. And they hope that they can have this system will kind of work with the organization like McDonald's. So in the UK, many franchises and small cafes are using recyclable hot beverage cups, which require the inner lining to be removed before the outer cardboard-like material can be recycled. But however, these cups have a life cycle before the molecular structure of the material breaks down, and then they are not reusable. So Loop is hoping for 100 deployments from each cup, which is a marked increase over traditional ones. So while McDonald's and they hope that more restaurants will implement these sorts of measures, the greater the infrastructure for board circular economic activity will grow to be, then allowing more and more companies to join in on the eco-friendly practices. So I guess McDonald's UK is giving this the first realm to see how it goes, but I am sure we will be seeing these reusable, recyclable cups in McDonald's all over the world very, very soon. Well, that is all of the feel-good, positive stories that I have to share with you today. I hope you enjoyed today's episode just as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Thank you so much for listening to GSMC, America's Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alyssa Jo. I appreciate you being here. Do not forget to hit that subscribe button, to like and follow us on social media, and leave a 5-star review. It helps out a ton, and I absolutely love reading those reviews, so don't forget to do that. Now do head over to our social media pages. I will post the pictures of those grids up on our Twitter page. I do post on the Instagram, the Facebook, the Twitter quite regularly, so don't forget to like and follow those. If you feel like interacting or chatting, or you have an awesome story you want to share with me, I would love to interact with you, so don't be afraid to head over there and shoot me a message. All right, well, thank you so much again for being here. Stay happy, stay positive, and spread kindness every single chance that you get.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows. From the GSMC Podcast Network, from social media news to marketing news, and even weird news, the GSMC Podcast Network has you covered. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast.